So today I have a very special interview with Dino Nocivelli, a very esteemed lawyer in child sexual abuse cases, and I'd just like to thank him for his time. I know he's a very busy man, and it's such an honor, to be speaking to you, especially with the impact that you've had within your profession, and the fact that you've built such a distinguished professional path advocating for the survivors of child sexual abuse cases. It's such a serious topic, and it must take a lot of dedication, time, and strong mental well-being, to be involved in something like that. So I'd just like to say thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. It's my pleasure. And I think just to start it off, I'd just like to hear a bit about your backstory. How did you get into law and what inspired you to be motivated to focus in this specific area of law because it's, such a serious part of law that not many people, know of when you think of going into law. Maybe, you hear family law or criminal justice, but this is, such a serious part. So, how did you get motivated to get into this side of law?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I come from a very much a working class background, and I've seen lots of injustice from my childhood. I first wanted to become a criminal lawyer. Then I considered corporate law, and employment and family law. I worked around different areas until I decided actually this was the right area for me, whereby you can work with a range of people, hopefully try to help them obtain a sense of justice and closure. The law is continuing to develop. Our knowledge and awareness of abuse and the impact continues to grow and expand, and the ability to ideally change the law as well is so important. We really do want to make a difference and to change perceptions, raise awareness, and ideally to stop abuse if we can, whether that's through the media work we do, through talks, through pieces like which we're doing with you right now,
Mm.
or with politicians. Things must get better, and ideally there will be no need for me to work in this area sooner rather than later. That must be what we all want. But it's taking its time. So we will continue to do it, continue to raise awareness. And that's why this area of law is something which I feel really passionate about.
Yeah. So how long have you been doing this kind of law now?
Yeah, majority of my life as a lawyer, as solicitor, so over a decade.
Mm.
Um, Qualified as a lawyer in 2012, so 12 years ago. And I've been doing this nearly the entire time of my professional career. So yeah, that's how long I've been doing it for.
Yeah, I feel like when you go into a job, in order to be, the best of your abilities, you have to be motivated, and because it's such a passionate cause, I feel like you fit, the right person, to be doing this sort of thing because there's a lot of corporate jobs where your soul's not in it, and especially with a topic such sensitive as this, it's so important, um, yeah, to just have your heart in it and have your soul.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So obviously, in the work you do in law, it must be very, intensive, and there must be, sometimes where you have to confront a lot of powerful institutions, big businesses, big, well, more recently coming into the news, footballing institutions, sports institutions, and religious organizations as well. So I'd just like to know how you really prepare for, the unique challenges that you do face and how you hold these, large entities accountable for the crimes that they commit.
Yeah, I think I usually look at most things in quite a black and white manner. I try my best to, because I think that's the best way of then applying kind of legal principles or morals or ethics to things. I
Mm.
think when things become grey is often when gaps come into play. Sadly, when we talk about safeguarding in children. So, on a basic level, wherever an adult is in a position of power, trust, and authority and abuses a child, whether that be sexual, physical, emotional, verbal, racial abuse, whether it's neglect, it's wrong. No ifs or buts about it. Now, if that person then has a position of authority given to them by an organization, whether that be a religious institution or a school or something like the Scouts or a sports club, then again, we need to look at their potential failings, whether that's through vicarious liability, and should they be held liable, responsible for the acts of that individual, or if they've been negligent, as in they were aware or should have been aware of concerns and failings. Now, most abuse takes place in the family home because that's where most children have contact with individuals, family, friends, neighbours, and the like. But a large number of people also suffer abuse within institutions. Um, and increasingly, we're aware of that. And increasingly, we are aware of the barriers and the different barriers for people. And that's a really important thing. Not every abuse survivor is the same. Not every abuser, abusive institution, not every form of abuse has the same impact. So again, it's appreciating and understanding that is increasingly a problem. But you're right, we go against some very large, powerful organizations, including, the government sometimes. It is a concern. It's one of the biggest barriers for people to disclose often. How can I disclose this horrendous act which took place when I was a child against someone who's really respected and well thought of in the community, and against such a powerful and big and financially able organization? How can I go against them? And that's something which we do have to confront quite frequently, sadly.
Yeah, and I can only imagine, especially with the funding that a lot of these large companies have, it must be so difficult to take into law and to get them prosecuted. So I can only imagine that, and um, yeah, it must be really difficult. And you've been a strong advocate. I've seen your Twitter, I've seen your social media, and you've been a strong advocate for changes in the legislation, particularly around the mandatory reporting of child sexual abuse. So could you maybe talk about a bit of the current gaps in the law and what reforms you believe are needed most urgently now to really make a massive difference?
Yeah, one of the key ones is this mandatory reporting.
Yeah.
What it means is that for far too long, we've been relying upon children to disclose their abuse. And we know the difficulties and the barriers to do that. And on average, it still takes about 30 years for someone to disclose their abuse, which means that they have to carry that pain and suffering for all those 30 years. It means the abuser may pass away without facing criminal justice. It
Mm.
means other children may suffer abuse. And it's just so much we need to help abuse survivors to disclose. Now, one of that could be if they told someone at the time, or since, or if people were aware of abuse, we think that they should be under a legal duty to report it to the authorities. Now, that doesn't happen. We've been relying upon people's morals and ethics for far too long. It doesn't matter if it's in the Catholic Church or in a boarding school or in a football club.
Mm.
People still have to be concerned about paying the mortgage and about the impact on their career. We understand that. I'm not here to finger blame, go, well, you should report it. Any concerns, even though that may affect your career or you may be unemployed. Um, we have to help the whistleblowers and the heroes who do disclose as much as the ones who don't feel able to. And I do think for those who don't report known abuse or very highly suspected abuse, then yeah, the criminal law should be considering actually, if you're not complicit, are you in essence aiding a crime which continues for that child and other children? Most of the developed world has it. So France, most states in Australia and America. It's a tool which is needed just to show actually it's a collective responsibility. Child welfare and safeguarding is. It isn't down to the child, the victim, the survivor to police this matter. We should all be responsible. And something which I often say is that it takes a village to raise a child and it takes a village to abuse a child. And adults are more likely to be aware of things than a child who's obviously very young, doesn't understand or doesn't comprehend sometimes what's happening in the grooming and manipulation. But those adults who are close to them are likely to be able to see it from further away and to be able to perhaps appreciate this isn't right. This could be grooming and manipulation.
Mm.
Should we look into this further? So one thing which we do demand as soon as possible is mandatory reporting to be brought into the statute books in this country. We'll have
Yeah.
to see if that's going to be done or not, to be frank.
Yeah. Do you believe that it's something that is likely to happen in the foreseeable future?
I live in perennial hope. It was on the statute book. Well, they were considering it the previous government where the Tories were.
Oh.
Um, It was recommended by an independent inquiry, which was published in 2022, October 2022. 2 years on, still hasn't been implemented. So I hope it is,
Yeah,
um, but we'll have to wait and see. We've been campaigning for this with our clients for so long,
yeah,
and it still hasn't been achieved. And it's an important tool. It's not a magic wand. It's not going to stop abuse, and I know
yeah.
that. But if it's able to prevent some abuse,
Step in the right direction.
then it's yeah, exactly that. And it just brings into that conversation and go, actually, we're all against abusers. No institution, I believe, wants to support
Yeah,
abusers or hide this. It's just about making it as easy as possible for every individual, every institution to do the right thing. And that's why I think the law change is needed. So I'm hopeful within the next 6, 12 months that it is in force. I'm very hopeful of that. We need to keep on pushing for it. Um, and there's just no guarantee. That's the problem. But we're going to keep on pushing for this because it's needed.
has the change of government sort of increased, the process of getting it into law, or so
The
it's not?
promise is, yeah, the change of government obviously have different political views, and
Yeah,
it's not a political comment, but it's a reset. And when you have a reset, you have to then, get your feet under the table, look at what the priorities are, the most pressing needs are, consider issues which we perhaps wouldn't have anticipated, like riots on our streets
yeah,
and
exactly.
places being smashed up, and that then taken away from resources in the criminal courts and prison spaces, which again we wouldn't anticipate. We couldn't have anticipated that happening when the election was in July. So um, we would hope that a fresh pair of eyes looking at this would agree it's needed. Um, but again, people's views and feelings and emotions and values is one thing. We do need to see it in the statute book. We do need to see this made law. So again, next 6 to 12 months, if it's not being drafted, if it's not being pushed forward as a key priority, then yes, we will be challenging that as much with this government as we were the last government, because the fact is abuse does not uh, distinguish or differentiate based on your political views. Anyone can suffer abuse, and it needs to be stopped.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I feel like it's such an important thing because so much pressure on, especially young children. They might feel, ashamed or they might feel scared. And I feel like, other countries have done it and it's obviously shown, improved sort of, prosecution maybe. And it's just something to, relieve the tension a little bit off kids and put it into law, make it concrete. And as you said, so rightly, it won't stop the thing. It won't stop it entirely, but that's what we have to do. We have to work with our problems. We have to try and make it a little bit better, a little bit better. We have to keep chipping away at it, and hopefully one day, we won't need to anymore because it's all
Yeah.
done. So yeah, in your experiences, what are some of the most, common misconceptions within the public about child sexual abuse cases, and how do you work around trying to dispel, those myths?
There's so many myths, to be
Mm.
frank, which are in play. One of the most significant is victim blaming, especially around men, actually, but also around women too. Is that why did you go back to your abuser? Why were you sexually aroused during the abuse? Why didn't you tell anyone? How could you let your brothers and sisters suffer abuse after you went through it? Um, and the list goes on and on. All of those are pure victim blaming, and they don't appreciate that the person you're dealing with now, who may be a 40-year-old woman or man, they were a 10-year-old child, and this is what they went through, and this is the pain and suffering they were put under, and the pressures they were put under, and the difficulties they faced. That victim blaming can often silence an abuse survivor. And this point about, well, why didn't you just punch them? Punch them when you push them off, when you say no.
Mm.
Again, it's pure victim blaming, which doesn't take into account the grooming and manipulation. It's a real significant factor. And even something like physical arousal does not mean mental um, acceptance or consent. The physical body will do something very different to what your mind is processing. And again, appreciating what happened when you were a child is so hard to process. Again, if you speak to a child about saying the world's flat and Man United are the best team in the world, neither of those are true, by the way. I don't know what team you support, but neither of them are true. But you will accept these things, same as, Father Christmas exists. And,
Mm.
sadly, science says he doesn't exist. Um, but a child will listen to and accept it, especially if you're someone who's very close to them. And this goes to the second myth, stranger danger. Um, Strangers often do not have the access and ability. You don't trust strangers. Who's that weirdo in the park? Who's that odd man walking down the road? There's no reason to trust them. If anything, you're more worried about them. But the people you do trust are people who are nice, people who are normal, people who your mum could have a drink with, your dad may go and play football with. Um, they are people like your family members and your neighbors and your sports coaches and your teachers, people who you can trust. And, Mr. Thomas has been a teacher for 20 years. Why would you not trust him? Father Brian has been a priest for 30 years. He baptized you, he christened you. Why would you not trust him? He's in the community. He opens the local school fete. He bakes cake on a Sunday. Why would you not trust him? He's a nice man. He's just trying to help. Those people, just think back to my child. My mum and dad didn't say about those people. They just said strangers in the park, the weirdo with the anorak and sweets, which everyone knows they're weirdos. You don't go near them. It's the ones who you can sadly see and hear from and trust and respect.
Yeah.
Those are the one where the mind doesn't believe, and they do not believe that those people can be abusers, but those are the ones. And that's the one thing in the media. We often depict child abusers as monsters. They're not monsters, sadly. They're
Yeah.
normal people, and that's what's terrifying. So when you go on the tube, you go on the train, any of those people could be abusers. If they were monsters, you would know about it and you wouldn't go near them. One of the other um, myths is that people who suffer child abuse then go on to become child abusers themselves. It's a really damaging myth. When you think about it logically, not every child who's beaten, not every child whose parents went through divorce, not every child who has um, other experiences in their lives then instills that to their own children. It isn't true from everything we see. It doesn't mean that people who have suffered abuse then go on to abuse their own children. That doesn't mean that's not the case, but it's roughly the same likelihood as someone who hasn't suffered abuse. And most people who go through harm, or parents who perhaps didn't hug them or said they loved them, who were not in their lives because of work or other issues, often you want to double back on those things and you are extra caring, extra present, extra protective of your own children. That's actually the truth.
Mm.
But that myth has resulted in some people never having children, has resulted in some men having mastectomies in their early 20s because they just cannot face that as a prospect. And that is a myth, which is a huge concern for us because, again, it's a barrier. And how do you explain that to your partner? We're going to get married, we're going to have children. Yeah, we're not having children. Or no, I will never let them to go to the scouts. But why? Because I suffered abuse. But that second aspect can't be said. So again, you just distance yourself. It is a real problem. And the last myth is that often in families, you always have a black sheep. And that means someone who's just out of sorts. You've got a criminal record, you're addicted to drugs or drink or self-harm or gambling or something else like that, or mental health difficulties. People often don't ask the reason why. Often it's superficial. You're a black sheep, but why? What's going on? What's the cause, not just the symptoms? And that can also ostracize you from your family. And when you do disclose, when you're in your 40s, let's say, and say, actually, I suffered abuse, me too. Um, that makes sense. That's why you're kicking off at teachers all the time. That's why you didn't like being around men. That's why you just randomly quit football. That's the reason why you started taking drugs and just getting drunk by yourself on a Tuesday night, not with anyone else. It wasn't like you were socializing, you were trying to deaden your emotions. I think as a society, we shouldn't just look superficially at why are you acting out as such, but what's causing that. Most children are amazing, really good, really happy. And I think when you see those immediate changes, sometimes it is puberty, sometimes it's not, but having a bit more of an open mind and asking more questions, I think is really important. Those are some of the myths. There are so many others, but all of these myths act as barriers to disclosure. And barriers to disclosure of abuse means abuse continues and abusers continue to abuse. That's why we need to break these myths. And it applies as much to children as it does to adult abuse. Women and men are abused as adults as well, similar to people who suffer domestic violence. Why did you not fight back? Why did you not tell anyone? Why did you cover up the bruises? Why did you not leave the family? Why did you not tell the police? It's continually victim blaming instead of asking, what can we do to help you talk? What can we do to help you leave him? How do we stop, a domestic abuser from abusing? How do we prevent abuse?
Mm.
Often the victim blaming is towards the actual victim. In a domestic violence situation, exactly the same in a sexual abuse case. So those are some of the myths, but there
Mm.
are so many more which we need to challenge, sadly.
Found it so important, that you mentioned that these sexual abusers, they're not always monsters. They're not always, the black sheeps of society. They're not easy to spot out. It's like, oh yeah, stay away from him. Like these could be active people in a community, and that's why obviously it's got a lot better, with reporting now, because let's say even like 20, 30 years ago, communities were quite gated, and, there'll be a guy in the community that'll get accused of doing something, but, oh no, it can't be him, he's a teacher, he provides so much to the community. Then you can only imagine, how the victim feels like it's their fault. And only in recent times, social media, technology is so much developments happening, and it's only going to keep continuing. Do you think that? Do you think that these myths have sort of been, victim blaming has got less as technologies has developed, and people are more educated, and what a victim feels and their emotions and what they go through, or do you think that it's got worse?
Yeah. It's being a black and white person. The simple answer to your question is no. It's not easy. It's not easier even because there's different issues in place, sadly. So we know abuse continues to the current day. And we know that still people still face the same barriers. The problem with social media is that we've had some clients who are, 13, 14, 15 now, and they suffered abuse in the last couple of years. They will get so much abuse through, WhatsApp and Snapchat and other social media forums, being called every name under the sun. You led the abuser on. Why would you make up these lies about him? You're, you know, numerous kind of inappropriate comments made about this individual and calling them, sexually inappropriate and sexually advanced and these kind of things. Those are clear barriers. And I think for a child, those are still in play, sadly. There's also quite a lot of abuse on social media, things which are inappropriate. There's also, for example, the recent Olympics, there was a Dutch volleyball player who's 19, who when he was
Yeah.
19, sorry, he raped a 12-year-old in England. So a Dutch volleyball player traveled over to England, 19, raped this 12-year-old girl numerous times, received a 4-year sentence, sent back to the Netherlands, only served 1 year, and yet in Paris Olympics 2024, representing this country. And I don't want to criticize Paula Radcliffe, the female runner, the English runner, but she did say, well, he'd saved his time, but like a drug cheat. That's how she used the example. Save your time, you should be able to carry on. And she later apologized, appreciating that was insignificant. If you take some performance enhancing drugs and you run 100 meters faster than me, you're a cheat and you're a liar because you lied, you cheated. You're not an abuser and you represent bad morals. Anyone who cheats is someone who should not represent their country, in my view. But even though my views on cheats and liars and drug cheats is so black and white, you must say they cannot be compared the same as someone who's a convicted child rapist because it's just so significantly worse. They are held out to be a role model. It's one of the things you need to sign up to as the Olympics. They represent their country. Would you want a child rapist to represent your country? Yes or no? How many other people could play volleyball for the Netherlands? There must be another one. And also detracted from so much else. He was part of a team, it was him and another person. It detracted from his teammate. It detracted from the volleyball for the Netherlands. Win or lose, didn't matter. The fact is he was participating. So as an example, that's all over social media and things still don't change. And the fact that people are more able to talk about it is true to an extent. If it was fully true, we wouldn't still see these exposures, whether it's abuse in certain sports, certain religions still trying to confront these issues, whether it's Jehovah's Witnesses or the Muslim community or Hindu or the Jewish community. There are still barriers throughout. And I think the one thing about social media is that in ways it is positive, in other ways it's an absolute cesspit. It is horrendous. The racial abuse we see, the mockery or jokes about sexual abuse and the like, it's a mixed bag. So that's why, even though on the face of it, it may seem easier, there
Mm.
are barriers, but in different ways. So we're more comfortable perhaps to talk about sex now, but again, certain categories get more awareness. So the far right will pick up more on Asian grooming gangs, which form a very small percentage of the total amount of abuse which we see in this country. Most abusers are white men, um, but everyone has different agendas. And again, it's not a political point. I'm not saying that we should protect Asian men who abuse children. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that the focus can sometimes be taken away from the survivor who just wants to say, actually, I suffered abuse and I want it to be dealt with. So there are barriers, there continue to be them, perhaps just different barriers than what were in place 20 years ago, 40, 50 years ago, even.
Do you think that public awareness of, child sexual abuse has got better in recent years and helping the victim?
Yeah, I think lots of people understand it better, but there are still quite large sections of society who still don't. Who
Yeah.
maybe it's generations, maybe it's race, ethnicity, sex, gender, sexuality. There's still barriers, so it's still not fully open, to be frank. And people still perhaps will not accept that. Yeah, your dad did this, your teacher did this. Those barriers still in place. So even though you may accept it in the kind of general form, yes, I understand what child abuse is,
Yeah.
but not my teacher, not my priest, not my rabbi. That is still in play because it's only when it comes home to you do you believe that child is making an accusation against your gymnast coach who you never had a problem with. He's a really nice guy, always really
Mhm.
supportive, always go the extra mile. That is still a barrier. That is still an issue which we see, and people still struggle to believe you over the respected person in a position of power, trust, and authority, which is the coach, the teacher, the priest, the rabbi, etc. That's still in place, sadly.
Yeah. It's horrible, that, the people in positions of power that abuse that. And it's so hard, to, get around because those people are always going to exist, and you have to put some sort of trust on, your teacher, on, your priest if you're religious. You always have to do that. And there's no controlling if they abuse that
Yeah.
power. And unfortunately, I don't think they'll ever stop. There's always going to be, one-offs or, those people who have bad intentions. So I've read up a lot about you, and there have been many, of your cases that have been has particularly the Catholic Church and the Church of England have been at the centre of many of the abuse cases that you've managed. How difficult is it to go against, the church, especially, um, something seen as, so holy or has a lot of support behind it? And how do you navigate, the difficulty in trying to, you know, just, yeah, do your work?
Yeah, I think when to go against religious institutions, you're not just dealing with an organization like a school or a football club or the military or the government. It has an added layer, and that is the religious context, whereby, in the Catholic Church, as an example, forgive and forget is one of the important principles. Um, and it is a conflict because the church want to support abuse survivors uh, in theory, but then they also want to support the abusers because that's part of the religious um, mantra. And it's difficult to balance those. And often abuse survivors see that actually they protect the abusers more, and they do struggle to reintegrate the victim survivor back into the religion. My I'm Roman Catholic. I was baptized as a child. My family are Italian, and for all the things which my family, my parents see me do and talk about, and the issues I raise, they still find it difficult for me to discuss abuse within the Catholic Church. They understand abuse in other areas, and that's why I find really interesting as kind of family and friends. They understand abuse happens, but not in the Catholic Church. They still struggle with that. And back in Italy, they still don't really appreciate that this still happens because again, it goes against your entire being. If
100%.
you are a yeah, if you're a religious person, it's not just I support Man United, I support Jesus Christ, and I'm a Roman Catholic. It's not just that. It goes through everything you do, the way you decide on having children, marriage, what you eat. For certain religions, you can't eat certain food, you've got to dress a certain way or not. Your kind of life morals and ethics, and you know, getting your house blessed, getting your child blessed. Where do you marry? Inside a church, a mosque, or elsewhere. If all of that is actually when a bit like Wizard of Oz, when you actually look behind, if actually there's abusive tendencies there, or cover-ups, or failings, it does seriously make you doubt yourself. It is a real problem, and it's a real concern because even something like the confessions. So in the Catholic Church, in other religions, you can have a confession, but the whole point is it's entirely confidential and private. Similar to me, I'm a lawyer, I have clients, and you have that confidentiality in place. But there must be exceptions. If you were my client, you said to me, "Look, I intend to go and murder 10 people." I know you're my client, and it's totally confidential. We have, a duty, but I would be obliged to report that because you're going to risk either harm to yourself or to others. That seems totally obvious. Um, with confessions, and they've fought it for long, and so still do. It is entirely confidential. There is no legal duty to report it. So if you say I'm a priest and I'm going into a confessional and saying I abused 10 other children, there's no legal duty to do so. And if actually there's a religious duty or principle not to act on it and not to report it, and that's when often there's a conflict. In principle, it makes sense to keep something confidential. You can tell me anything you want, it doesn't go anywhere. But there must be certain things which you do have to report and have to raise. So I find religion is the biggest issue. And predominantly the focus has been on the Catholic religion and the Church of England. You're right. There has been some cases um, within the Jewish community, Jehovah's Witnesses,
Yeah.
some within the Muslim community. But you consider how many religions there are. It's not that the Rastafarian hasn't got a sexual abuse issue or the Sikh religion. It's about people being able to disclose and feeling comfortable to do so. And even the scale of abuse within the Jewish community, for example, we've only seen the very tip of that iceberg because the religious undertones are so high. Someone like the Mormon religion, you can't masturbate, and in the Catholic Church, it's supposed to be a virgin before marriage. So if you suffered abuse and those two things aren't right, how do you then tell your family and friends about these problems when actually your religion says you are now impure because these acts have taken place? It's so hard to get that balance right. And again, most religious people, their values and principles, regardless of religion, is to be generally a good person. That's what religion is, isn't it? So to set down your life principles and morals on something. But with abuse, no religion really deals with it right. And they really struggle to kind of get that balance. And it can mean that it alienates people from their friends and family because I can't be in a church anymore. It's too triggering, as an example, or a mosque or anywhere else. So, yeah, religion is one of the biggest issues which we're dealing with. And I think there's sadly a lot more people to come forward and disclose their abuse within these institutions.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like with religion, it's much different. Maybe if you go to a football club, obviously it's hard to come out as a victim anyway. But religion is so gated, and especially when you're surrounded by people or communities that dedicate their whole lives, to worshiping God and having that faith and having that trust in a holy person such as a priest or such a good server of God, such as like someone in your church. It must be so extremely difficult to not only report it yourself, but to also be accepted by maybe your family as well, which you possibly scared of, being disowned.
Yeah.
Yeah, it must be so difficult. And we only have a bit more time left because Zoom only allows 40 minutes. But just to end off, and thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing, to just chat and get to know a bit more about your field. what are your goals for the future, and how do you see the landscape of this field changing in, let's say, the next decade?
So next decade, the wish or aim, the aim is probably the right word, has to be to break the taboo of abuse fully, so that um, everyone feels able to discuss their abuse and disclose their abuse at the time it's happening. That must be one of the key aims. So remove the taboo, bring down the average age of disclosure, let's say from 40 to 20 and young if we can, which means that people can get back on their feet, obtain the help and support they need, and to break that cycle of abuse. That's one of the key aims, reducing the age of disclosure. We need to ensure that um, criminal punishments are proportionate to the offences committed, and that we have more resources in the criminal justice system for the police and the Crown Prosecution Service and prison spaces and the like, so that survivors aren't waiting weeks and months for statements to be taken and years for their case to get to trial. That's really important. We also need to consider for the third aim is to make sure that mental health has the same basis and standing as physical health. Often with medical professionals, they wait until you are suicidal and attempt suicide before true intervention will take place. And often waiting lists for mental health takes 6, 9, 12 months to get mental health support,
Pounds.
often not with a specialist, often a limited amount of sessions. But again, if you break your leg, you're going to get surgery within a week, you're going to get physiotherapy within a couple of weeks, and it's just not considered the same. So again, I think giving mental health provision the true support it needs is really important. And the last aim, sorry, is to try to get mental health support into schools immediately. Because if people are able to say, look, I'm struggling with this issue. It may not be from sexual abuse, but it could be. Whatever the cause is what we need to deal with rather than the symptoms. I think far too long we've been doing that, looking at the tail rather than looking at the dog, which is wagging the tail. And I think that getting mental health provision into schools could enable children to perhaps talk. And if it's one child, if it's 10 children, that would be so much better. And if we can get down and play, it does then help later on in their life as well. So those are some of the kind of key aims, which would be really good. Would make such a big difference for abuse survivors, in my view.
Yeah, thank you so much. For those words as well. And I think recently after lockdown, mental health has been taken more seriously, but it's
Yeah,
still not where it needs to be because it's affecting more and more kids,
yeah,
especially like with phones, mobiles, engage in small communities, and now because of networking everywhere around the world. So yeah,
yeah.
I definitely agree with you there. Thank you.